Hinkley, California, a small desert town primarily recognized for its role in the Hollywood movie Erin Brockovich. Those that have seen the movie Erin Brockovich are led to believe that this small desert town that boasted 2 churches, a bar and restaurant, a reportedly fine school, and blocks of single-family residents was fairly and justly compensated by pg&e. In my mind, that couldn't be any further from the truth. In the deep heart of the Mojave Desert lies a place called Hinkley. The late 1950s and the 1960s saw the building of homes and schools and increased population in Hinkley. The homes were mostly made of cinder block, much like the ones 14 miles south in Barstow. Hinkley is actually an unincorporated community, not having its own nor being incorporated with another town, city, or municipality. Census data for Hinkley comes only from its zip code rather than its name. If you've seen the Erin Brockovich movie, then you know something of this story. The pg&e plant was quietly built in 1952 and was the compressor station for pg&e's massive natural gas pipelines. Natural gas has to be recompressed about every 350 miles. The station used large cooling towers to cool the compressors. The water in the towers contained hexavalent chromium to prevent rust in the machinery. Between uses, the water was stored in unlined ponds, which ultimately contaminated the groundwater of Hinkley. Chromium is a highly toxic chemical known to cause cancer in humans. Unknown to the residents, most troubling problem was unseen and unknown for 10 to 15 years. The residents had been drinking, bathing, and swimming in chromium-contaminated water. Among the first problems to show up were odd ailments: bloody noses, intestinal ailments, rotting teeth, and tumors. In 1987, pg&e claimed that during the routine check, they discovered chromium had leaked into the water supply. They reported it to the California Regional Water Quality Control Board as required. Ordered to clean up the mess, pg&e undertook a $12.5 million cleanup effort, approaching the owners of 3 farms and 10 houses in the area and offering to buy their properties. Roberta Walker was one of those people approached by pg&e, which offered to buy her house, valued at $25,000 at the time, for $60,000. She said she did not want to sell. When the utility asked her for a figure, she blurted out $250,000. A few weeks later, the company agreed. The quick acceptance made her suspicious. That's when she started searching for a lawyer.
And I went to the water board and I asked if I could look at some files. And they let me come to the back. I got my files, I got a copy machine, and I started making copies because my picture of my house was there. And it had levels of chromium and testing and all this stuff. And it had pictures of my mother-in-laws and pictures of my neighbors and this and this and that. And I'm like, oh my God, something's going on. There's something not right.
Through a friend, she found a law firm, a personal injury firm in Westlake Village, northwest of Los Angeles. At the time, Erin Brockovich worked as a clerk at the firm. Ed Masry drove out to talk with Walker and eventually brought Brockovich. Other townspeople later heard about the visiting attorney and called Masry's office. He soon placed an ad in the local newspaper announcing a town meeting to collect clients and mount a lawsuit. Masry told the residents that he believed that pg&e's chromium had poisoned the water and that this was responsible for their ailments. He offered to represent them in a suit against the giant utility. Throughout 1992, he and Brockovich continued to drum up clients. During this time, Brockovich, by her own account, went to UCLA's library and found as many as 120 articles that said chromium-6 was carcinogenic. In each and every article, it clearly depicts that people who have exposures have chronic nosebleeds, kidney problems, and colon problems, she said during an interview. Masry filed a suit claiming pg&e had discharged toxic water into the area. pg&e responded by saying the complaint didn't state sufficient facts or other legal grounds to support its claims. But the case moved forward in San Bernardino County Superior Court. And this is where the truth about what happened in Hinkley differs from what we learned in the Erin Brockovich movie. The case on behalf of the residents of Hinkley, California against pg&e was set to move forward. At this point, Masry brought in some big guns: Thomas Giardi of Giardi & Keese in Los Angeles and Walker Lack of Engstrom. Lack's firm specialized in insurance, bad faith, and toxic torts. Giardi is one of the state's best connected and most powerful attorneys. When Giardi and Lack joined the pg&e case in 1994, the utility didn't put up much of a fight. "We screwed up by not cleaning the areas sooner," pg&e spokesman Greg Pruitt acknowledged in a local paper at the time. The case started in open court in front of Judge Leroy Simmons, but before too long, Simmons retired. At that time, the California court dockets were overwhelmingly booked solid. Realizing that the time frame could compromise the citizens of Hinkley even further, Giardi wrote to the residents of Hinkley, explaining that it could be 5 more years before the case could be assigned on a trial date in open court. So, on the advice of Giardi and the other attorneys, the residents agreed to voluntarily arbitration. pg&e, wary of facing an unsympathetic jury and an attorney with a reputation as a skilled courtroom litigator, agreed as well. Arbitration is billed as a cheap, quick, and private way to resolve civil disputes. This practice gained momentum in the 1980s, when judges, vowing to pressure to alleviate overcrowded courtrooms, began encouraging litigants to resolve their disputes voluntarily. In the pg&e arbitration, Giardi, Masry, and Lack expected to settle the case against the utility for $400 million, according to a July 2, 1996 letter to their clients. The case was heard before a panel of retired judges in San Francisco and Los Angeles. The rules that apply in an open court often aren't followed in private court. No laws prevent the hired judges from accepting gifts from attorneys. Another criticism is that arbiters and their clients and attorneys often work together regularly. As it turned out, Giardi had ties to at least 3 of the private judges in the pg&e case: Jack Tenner, John Trotter, and Jack Goldson. Had this occurred in public court, judicial rules would have forced the judges to recuse themselves from the case due to conflict of interest. But no such ethical standards behind participates in private arbitration. And as it turned out, pg&e's lawyers had similar and stronger ties to the other private judges in the case. Indeed, what happened next provides a rare glimpse into the sometimes cloak-and-dagger world of 9-figure lawsuits. During negotiations in June 1996, pg&e appeared to be stalling. Giardi told clients in the July 2nd letter. Then, Giardi learned that pg&e's outside counsel, Haight Brown, Brown Steele of Santa Monica, had hired private investigators to snoop into his bank records and private affairs, as well as those of his clients. It is against California law to obtain confidential private records. One of the firm's counsels, who had just been fired, took the damning information to Giardi. When this illegal activity was finally revealed, pg&e fired its law firm and hired another. On June 12, 1996, pg&e settled the Hinkley case with Giardi for $333 million and delivered the money a few weeks later. It was trumpeted as the largest settlement of its kind. Many of the Hinkley residents were finding themselves more and more removed from the events in this suit that directly involved them. Still, many of them were delighted to hear about the settlement's general terms, figuring that $250 million would benefit them to the tune of $500,000 each, minus their attorney's fees. But in August 1996, when they were informed of the amount of their award and the circumstances of their payment, many were shocked. First, the plaintiffs were surprised that their attorneys told them that they wouldn't be getting their money for 5 months. Under California state bar rules, an attorney must release the client's money promptly as soon as the client asks for it. Although many factors could delay the distribution of funds for a few weeks, none of the legal experts who examined the case or who were interviewed understood the lengthy hold period. Some people needed their money to pay off medical debts, others wanted to buy new cars and appliances. The attorneys were besieged with over 100 phone calls from clients, lenders, creditors regarding the unreleased settlement rewards. It got so bad that after August 21, 1996, Lack's office wrote a letter to the clients telling them, "There simply isn't time to have these conversations." Imagine that. Finally, on January 2, 1997, nearly 6 months after pg&e had deposited the money, the attorneys mailed awards to their clients. It is not clear where the interest the money accumulated went. Giardi's office sent out a global settlement statement that seems to indicate that the accrued interest went to the money dispersed to the residents of the town. Many of the residents had a hard time reconciling with the small amount of their checks and the enormous legal fees. Arbitrated cases are supposed to be quicker and cheaper than court trials. In this case, Masri, Giardi, and Lack took 40% or $133 million. The residents, of course, had agreed to this. But then, the clients were billed an extra $10 million for expenses, which was not detailed. "I wrote Giardi a letter asking for a statement about the accounting of the case," said resident Gonzales, but Giardi didn't provide one. That left $196 million for the plaintiffs, or on average about $300,000 per victim. The amounts varied. Dorothea Montoya received $60,000. Christine Mace got $50,000. All of these people were longtime residents who had suffered documented medical illnesses. "It didn't make any sense why my husband, who's had 17 tumors removed from his throat, only got $80,000, said Smith. Since the official accounting of the money is secret, there is no way to ascertain how much money was distributed to Hinkley residents short of a survey of all 650 clients. Their suspicions aroused by the secrecy, many Hinkley residents want to know where the money went. Family members who had experienced the same level, intensity, and duration of chromium exposures received wildly different awards. The Gonzales family, for example, who had lived close to the pg&e plant for 14 years. The father, who had had a foot of his lower colon removed, received $100,000. His daughter, Lydia, who had suffered skin problems, received $200,000. Another daughter, Anita, who led one of the first groups of plaintiffs and who also lost some of her colon, received about $2 million. His son Daniel, who has suffered skin and other problems, received nothing. "This story wasn't dramatic enough," said his son Ron. Residents were first told in the July 2, 1996 letter that their awards would be based on their medical records. Some residents say their medical records were never solicited. "But no one ever looked at my medical records," said Smith. "I'm sure of that because my doctor told me so after I asked." Other plaintiffs echoed some of the same complaints. In the summer of 1997, while some of the residents of Hinkley were still fuming over what they regarded as paltry checks, Giardi and Lack, flush from their winnings and wanting to give something back to the California legal community, organized a week-long Mediterranean cruise for 90 people, including 11 public and private judges. The 3 pg&e attributors were among those invited. One judge called it absolutely incredible. A luxury yacht floated on azure waters. Tuxedoed butlers balanced silver trays of free champagne. Young, bikini-clad ladies frolicked on the sun-splashed deck, according to a retired judge who was a guest. This gives lawyers a bad name. Meanwhile, the pg&e plaintiffs grew increasingly disenchanted with the case. Roberta Walker regrets that she ever agreed to arbitration. "I wanted it to go to court. I wanted a jury to decide it." She believes that if that had happened, pg&e's executives might have gone to jail for murder, for lying, and for destroying the lives of thousands of people, she said. She added that she does not begrudge her attorneys for their fees, but wishes that the settlement had provided her and her family with free medical coverage for life, since their medical issues were a result of pg&e's negligence. And some of her neighbors had grown disgusted with their lawyers. "I feel like I was treated like a country hick that didn't understand plain English," said Tyndall. "We were the ones who made those guys gazillionaires." Some residents began to take their cases to at least 4 other attorneys for help. One of those was Michael Dolan, who runs a one-man practice in Bakersfield. He talked to 81 of the plaintiffs and found that they received on average $152,000. That too fueled speculation among the town's residents about who had gotten the money. But before Dolan took any action, Giardi, Lack, and Masri went on the offensive. On June 22, 1998, the 3 filed a lawsuit against Dolan. They claimed Dolan slandered them when he told Hinkley plaintiffs that they had the right to sue Giardi, Lack, and Masri for malpractice among their issues. The attorneys also claimed that Dolan had interfered with their business relationships with the clients. And so, the story grows more complex. In all, it was no Erin Brockovich victory. Many residents tried to resume life as normal, many others left. The tragedy of the desert has risen again. Oh, but there's more. The residents today are victims of pg&e once again, this time in the form of an underground plume of chromium in the groundwater. State water officials in California say the amoeba-like plume is 2.5 miles long. pg&e officials said that the plume spread should have been hampered by a thick layer of clay, which obviously it wasn't. But generous to the bone, pg&e notified select residents that they were eligible to receive free bottled water. According to the water officials in California, this 2.5 mile long plume is 1 mile wide and advancing west and northwest at a rate of about a foot a day. In some places, the plume grows and shrinks. In others, it might spout a lobe as it responds to hydraulic pressures, one spokesperson said. pg&e continues to pump water from the edges of the plume and apply it to alfalfa fields with a subterranean drip system to avoid having the same old chromium-6 surface. Or worse yet, surface and be kicked up by the dirt winds. The alfalfa is used to feed cattle. Let's have a moment for that. PG&E is also injecting 115,200 gallons of fresh water daily along the western boundary of the plume to block the contaminants from migrating to Hinkley Elementary School's wells, about 2,100 feet away. And in a separate issue, on November 19, 2010, residents in Barstow and Hinkley were notified that Golden State Water Company about an issue regarding tap water. They were not to use ice, water, beverages, or formula made with tap water. They were also warned against boiling the water to eliminate the problem, as that would result in higher concentrations of the chemical contaminant. The warnings came when officials found chemical contamination of the water, specifically perchlorates higher than the maximum contaminant level of 6 parts per billion. Perchlorate is an inorganic chemical used as solid rocket propellant, fireworks, explosive, flares, matches, and a variety of industries. This interferes with the human thyroid gland, affecting hormones as well as parental growth during pregnancies. Golden State Water Company is investigating the source of the contamination. Water is usually tainted by perchlorate from industrial or aerospace facilities. Meanwhile, the PG&E plume issue is unresolved. The free bottled water offer came along with a denial of responsibility or other assistance for the economically depressed and impoverished Hinkley on November 15th. Somehow, things changed on November 19, 2010. The same day, the residents were warned about the unrelated high level of perchlorates in their water. PG&E spokesperson Jeff Smith said letters had been sent to 100 property owners closest to the plume. The letters offer to buy the properties, homes, and land. PG&E is not only willing to purchase the properties, they are willing to pay residents somewhat generously, considering they devalued the market in Hinkley in serious efforts to resolve the problem. The tragedy of the desert continues. The fight to make the public entities responsible continues. And contaminant of the one most precious resource anywhere, especially in desert life, continues. It seems the story of Hinkley is far from over. One question I haven't heard being asked is this: why is Hinkley, California there? What brought these families to come and live in this desolate Mojave Desert, and when? The Erin Brockovich movie starts long after Hinkley, California was created. So why was PG&E in Hinkley, California? Why was power being brought there in the first place? In 1944, the Hawes Auxiliary Army Airfield No. 1 was described by the United States Army Navy Director of Airfields as being an auxiliary to Victorville Army Airfield. It is not known when the Hawes Airfield was built, but aerial views show it with 4 runways in 1942. The Hawes Airfield was in Hinkley, California. Sometime between 1960 and 1964, the use of the Hawes Airfield was discontinued. Then, sometime between 1964 and 1967, a large Air Force radio relay station was built adjacent to the airfield site. While locals referred to this as the Hawes Radio Tower, the proper name was United States Air Force Survivable Low Frequency Communications Systems Site, Hawes. The tower was just over 1,200 feet tall, the same height as the Empire State Building. It could transmit data at 5 to 10 characters a second, absolute state-of-the-art at the time. One of the most impressive things about the system, as recalled by personnel who worked there, was that everything was digital. The tower was a landmark for Hinkley, California. The mission of the tower, however, was a dark one. The purpose was to pass communications between various agencies and specifically to provide strategic air command communications before, during, and after nuclear attacks. It was surrounded by military bases: March AFB, Edwards AFB, George AFB, Vandenberg AFB, 29 Palms Air Ground Combat Center, Barstow Logistic Base, and Fort Irwin. Being insulated against ground, the tower could easily provide communications to ground and mobile nuclear missile facilities during the Cold War. Part of the facility was built into the ground, designed to withstand a moderate nuclear blast from a distance of 10 miles. That facility was self-sustaining and employed a sophisticated ventilation system along with the backup diesel generators. In 1987, Strategic Air Command Headquarters determined that the Hawes radio tower was no longer needed and it was demolished, leaving the small place known as Hinkley without its distinctive landmark. Although these are now ruins, they played an important role in the development of Hinkley in the 1960s. Many of the few remaining residents are veterans or active in the armed forces. Edward Louis Mashry, the attorney that, with help from his assistant Erin Brockovich, built the case against pg&e in 1993, passed away December 5, 2005. Girardi, from Girardi Keese Law Firm, now 83 years old, has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and is in a court-ordered conservatorship. The CFO of Girardi's law firm, Christopher Kamen, embezzled $10 million from the firm, federal prosecutors said. This was on November 10, 2022. Kamen is alleged to have spent stolen funds on a 13-month-long renovation on one of his 5 residences he owns and was giving a monthly stipend of $200K per month to an escort he met online, along with lavish vacations. It's sad to think that more than 30 years later, the underground plume has only expanded. On top of the chromium-6 issue, there have also been findings of above-average arsenic levels in the water. Oh, and on top of all of that, there's a giant manure pile on fire right outside of Hinkley. They have absolutely no plans to stop this. If you have any more information, please leave a comment below. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. I hope you enjoyed this week's video. Please leave a like and subscribe for more content weekly.